Well, it would break my heart so much more for an invasion to happen, because I think travel is a great way to to humanize everyone. And I was always against the war in Iraq, and I didn't have any Iraqi friends, but I automatically knew that was the wrong thing to do. And it's easy to think like 2 million people died in that conflict when they're othered, they're just numbers. And I think so many Americans have this lack of empathy for people around the world and even our own neighbors, right? And so it's affected me, and just expanding my firsthand experiences with so many more members of my human family.
Welcome back to War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. When you're on the left, you get told to travel a lot. For example, people who support Palestinian human rights are often told to go to Gaza, and people who support socialism are told to go to Cuba. Well, my guest today actually did. Gabe Pacheco is a comedian here in New York who recently went on an aid mission bringing medicine, real medicine, not just laughter, to the island. Welcome, Gabe.
Thank you so much for having me, Orli. Yes, I agree with you. War is stupid. And I fell in love with the name of your podcast because one of my favorite little pamphlets is War is a Racket by the one and only
Smedley Butler.
Yeah. Big Smedley. Big butts.
Yeah, big butthead.
Yeah.
We need to bring the name Smedley back.
Oh man. Well, I think that could be someone's if you're Christian and you get baptized, that could be your Christian name that they baptize you with,
That would be incredible. I'm like in Park Slopes. The old man name renaissance is huge out here, so it's only a matter of time before the Mauries and the Theos get to Smedley.
Dude, inshallah, we can only hope.
Yeah.
We can only hope. Yes. So, and so I was just thinking about him when you brought up Cuba, because I was a Latin American studies major in college, and thinking about Smedley and sort of his as a true believer of the Monroe Doctrine, and thinking about him and the gun diplomacy that the United States kind of, enacted all over the Caribbean and all over Central America, and how he was part of, he had his fingers and toes in all of that. And then at the end of his life, he's like, war is a racket, and he goes, man, I was a gangster for the capitalist class. And so thinking about that, I always thought about the United States' interference in other countries and how it has really hobbled and, suppressed any sovereignty and independence that any of these countries could have had. And Cuba, I've loved as one of the few countries that stuck its eye in or it stuck its thumb in the eye of the American empire.
Yeah, tell us historically what has been Cuba's relationship with the United States, and what is it now?
Well, yeah, and this is all just the preamble to why I went there, But for one, Cuba was one of the largest islands in the Caribbean, and it was the springboard for the transatlantic slave trade. So a lot of the captive Africans from West Africa ended up in Cuba first before they made even more fateful trips to the United States, and you still see this vibrant African culture on the island of Cuba, especially in the form of Santeria. And when I went there last May, just on a vacation, but it was an educational vacation I went on. And I met so many Cubans that really praised their Yoruba heritage and saw this direct connection to Nigeria, for example, because that's where the Yoruba people come from. and like the origins of Santeria on the island come from there. And so if you study, American history in and of itself, a lot of times we start with like the Black experience or the African American experience as something that sort of like blossomed from the soil of the United States, kind of like a cotton blossom, without really looking at where this large portion of the American population and our identity come from. Like, we don't really look at African Americans as like a historical people. We look at them as sort of like almost their identities as indigenous United States starting in bondage. But like, they got here from Cuba and before that from West Africa, so I went to Nigeria with Justin Williams, who's another fantastic comedian. And then I went to Cuba, and both of those trips really helped me kind of like create this link uh, back to how so much of American identity actually comes from Africa, but has been kind of erased from our uh, like cultural consciousness.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, it wasn't until Ta-Nehisi Coates went that like people were even talking about it.
Yeah. So you asked about Cuba, and like, I don't know. I mean, it's too complicated to even bring up why Cuba is significant in just a 45-minute conversation, but just that kind of being one of my lived experience threads as to like what's made Cuba stick out in my consciousness, you know? But its initial history right before the revolution that Castro enacted was the dictatorship of Batista. And so we can kind of start our story there, like, before during in the 50s, before the revolutionaries took over, Batista was another military leader who had his own coup. I won't call it a revolution, but sort of like his own coup, where he turned Cuba into a United States business friendly and organized crime friendly island for U.S. interests. And
Oh, damn. So he was like the Shah of Cuba,
a
and
hundred percent,
backed by the US.
yeah. So the U.S. had a couple primary interests in Cuba, and one of them was the sugarcane plantations. And also that's where rum comes from. So if you watch movies like or shows like Boardwalk Empire, you can see this connection between Cuba and like liquor. But also uh, the um, the Meyer Lansky and his boys, who were the if you watch movies like Mobsters, where you see Lucky Luciano uh, and um, and Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky coming together, were like Italian and Jewish crime syndicates formed during Prohibition. The Jewish gangsters had money deeply invested in the casinos in Havana. So
And the musical Guys and Dolls. This just unlocked a memory of when I did Guys and Dolls in middle school. And there's a scene where Sky Masterson takes Sarah Brown to Havana. It like
yeah,
features prominently in
yeah.
the turn of the century
hmm
mobster consciousness.
So Havana was going to be like Las Vegas, before Bugsy Siegel went out west and created the casino Sin City for us on the U.S. mainland. Meyer Lansky was doing that out on the island. And so not only when our ragtag group of rebels led by Fidel and Che and Almeida and Cienfuegos and a few other, and like there are basically like 12 revolutionaries that survived this fateful boat trip from Mexico on an old boat, the Abuela, and it was like 80 revolutionaries that were on this boat, and they land in Cuba and they get mowed down. Almost all of them die except for 12, which is like an apocryphal number,
Wow.
right. It's all the Abrahamic religions love the number 12, so 12 of these dudes survive, and they run off to the Sierra Madre Mountains, where they hide out, befriend the peasant population, link up with the urban revolutionaries from other groups and basically overthrow Batista's government, which was and I think of Batista's government kind of like in Vietnam, the Diem regime of South Vietnam as well. Like when we compare sort of like Iran with the Shah and Diem with the South Vietnamese. So they depose him, and it's like straight out of Star Wars, where you have this ragtag group that's totally outnumbered, able to enact such a radical, um, governmental change. Uh,
Do the people of Cuba wear Che Guevara shirts as much as undergrads at liberal arts colleges do?
I think no, but his face is up everywhere. So I think they have a complicated relationship with their revolutionary past. Um, in that it is like I've heard this thing said that first they got to put you on a pedestal to hang you,
Mm.
or another one is like the easiest way to sort of neutralize a revolutionary is to like give them a holiday,
Oh, yeah.
or make them a state sanctioned sort of idol, right? And we see that with like Martin Luther King, you know,
Oh,
uh,
for sure. They'll take away the Voting Rights Act, but you get a Monday off in January. So
yeah,
you're welcome.
or like the worst street in any underserved neighborhood is like Martin Luther King Avenue or Boulevard, right? And so the name both becomes blighted, but it also becomes like nobody wants to read the textbook about your hero, So I'd say in Cuba there is that where maybe they love everything that the revolutionaries were able to do, but that moment of revolution is frozen in time, and it addressed the specific conditions of that moment. And because those heroes are now dead and frozen in time, their words don't always address the current situation.
And the powers that be presumably don't want another one. So they're like, enjoy these stories of the past, but
Uh,
don't learn anything from the present.
I mean, don't we see that here? Like, who
Yeah.
wears, when you think about United States citizens, the ones that are pro thin blue line are the ones that have the "Don't tread on me" flags on their pickup trucks.
Yeah.
So, the bootlickers are the ones that always bring up, the true sons of liberty and all sorts of nonsense like that. Um, but yeah, in Cuba, I think the revolutionaries definitely made missteps, and, Che was this, kind of a brilliant, role model for, like, a lot of people in that he was a son of upper middle class Argentinians who were, like, white passing, be very European stock, and he could have had the coziest life in Argentina as, like, a allergist, like a doctor, but then he goes on this fateful motorcycle trip and he learns about the sort of universal conditions of poverty uh, and exploitation all over Latin America, and also gains pride in this sort of like pan Latin American identity, seeing the ruins at Machu Picchu, or seeing these ancient ruins that predate Spanish conquest. So he's like, look at what it's almost like a hotep, like sort of like looking back to the pyramids in Egypt, but like looking back to like and having pride in something outside of European colonization and being like, we are of Latin America. And he saw himself as part of a greater group than just like this Argentinian identity, which is what led him to Mexico City to go hang out with a ragtag group of Cuban nerds dreaming of taking back their island and liberating it from U.S. Cultural imperial control. And you brought up earlier travel being so important, and like here we see someone who became a radicalized figure who was an agent of change around the world because of his own travels.
That's amazing. Yeah, it really just as easily could have gone on a cruise and gotten hantavirus. But no, he had a had a
Yeah.
cultural experience. So how would you say your travels have informed how you relate to the world or what changes you want to make in the world?
Oh, wow. Okay, so, I mean, I've gone in such a roundabout way with this direct question you asked me about Cuba, haven't I? But I think that, going there, we can get to Cuba right now specifically. I've been there twice, and the second time I went was with the Nuestra Americas convoy and under the umbrella of Code Pink. So I went, Code Pink and a variety of other groups went with Nuestra America convoy. And because I'd already gone there to vacation once, I had seen the conditions on the island, and I was blown away with the quality of life in the unquantifiable forms. Like when we look at capitalism, it's like easy to reduce things to, well, how much money are people making as a metric of happiness or well-being, you know? Or but like the things that I noticed were the vibrant street life. And what I mean by that is everyone on the street knew everyone else on the street, you know? I can imagine that children could be walking around at 2 AM, completely unbothered and totally safe. Because if you own your house and your mom lives on the same block 2 doors down, and your neighbors are all people you've known your whole life because no one has to move like we do here in New York. We're part of a nomadic proletariat, and we are housing insecure because if we can't pay our rent, we have to move. In Cuba, there's no rent. So, a child walking on the street is always safe because there's no stranger danger.
There are no strangers. Yeah.
So I noticed that first off, just the amount of people who were living public lives and living in the public sphere. So, that blew me away that you would know all your neighbors, and there would be sort of a multi-generational consciousness of people around you. Uh, I can't imagine there being an introvert on the entire island. You simply wouldn't survive because you can't really be a shut-in, You realize that you're part of, like, a larger organism and not just an individual that can, DoorDash or sit home and binge watch Netflix and get on an app and, like, kind of have disposable relationships. You have to be out. So that's one thing I noticed.
That's so charming. And because here we almost exclusively hear the bad things, which is pile of garbage, no food, no internet. Like was that the case as well?
Yes. Okay. So there are other. I mean, there's a lot of need on the island, and again, like I didn't go there because it's this utopia or this paradise. The things that I was kind of bringing up and elevating are the things that we've lost in our own system.
Hmm.
What Cuba has always been a place of scarcity, and that's by design. Like one of them, even before Castro took over, and even before Batista, um, one of the biggest problems with like a colony is that it becomes a mono agricultural sort of exporter of goods that are sent back to the center of empire. So for Cuba, that was the sugar plantations. So all of the arable land is being used to produce sugar for export, which means even though it's got such fertile land, none of that land is being used for self-sufficient, like self-sustaining crops, agriculture, or farming. And they didn't really have an industrial base either because all of the machinery that was on the island was used to help process sugarcane. So then, when the revolution happens in the 50s, they try to industrialize as much as they can and diversify, but that was kind of made impossible by the United States. and then they ended up turning to the Soviet Union for support. And the Soviet Union would buy as much of their sugar as they could, subsidize them, and then give them Soviet products back. Right. So now they're still not in a position where they're becoming self sufficient. They just have a much better arrangement with the Soviet Union because of the United States embargo. That was like, the US didn't want to work with them because they nationalized um, a lot of the land, and they nationalized a lot of the businesses that had existed, the US businesses that existed on the island, that were trying to extract value from them. So
And in
yeah,
doing so, just throw them into the hands of the Soviet Union, which is why war is stupid. I mean, it's safe to say you antagonize people, then of course they'll need support from somewhere.
yeah, so and really the unintended consequence of that was, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which like boomers think about as the first time they thought that a nuclear war might actually happen and bombs
It,
would rain down on them from Cuba.
it's so funny in the Timothy Chalamet Bob Dylan movie. That's when when Bob Dylan and Joan Baez hook up for the first time. It's like during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Just and he sings "Masters of War" in Greenwich Village, and she's like, "We have nothing to lose."
Yeah, yeah, and then Cuba is seen as like this big bad, big bads, and then you go to the island and you see that it's just such a like wonderful, warm group of people and culture, and they're living in scarcity, and they're being deprived of so many things currently because they have put all of their resources into, their free healthcare and the food that everyone is guaranteed and the housing that everyone's guaranteed, and they don't get a lot of capital from the outside world. And one of the biggest streams of capital they had was tourism. So even though the U.S. didn't allow official tourism. In Cuba, American citizens can go, but there's a big stigma against that, and they were getting some investments from Italy and Spain and China, but this current embargo situation really locked them out of like the global market. So no one wants to go there if they're having blackouts constantly, and the money from tourism isn't really enough to like, you know, bring on paper. The Cuban people have so many rights, right? To um, to housing and healthcare and food. But the reality is that the material goods just aren't there because of our stranglehold on the island.
What's the end game? Why Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, so why punish Cuba?
Cuba has juicy beachfront property, you know, and it's kind of it feels like a real estate grab. These embargoes are meant to collectively punish the population and slowly starve them to with the hope that they will get so dissatisfied with their government that they will rise up or they will be totally weakened when an invasion occurs. And this is what's been going on with Iran as well. Before this recent war with them, they have also been living under sanctions, and they had a vibrant black market oil delivery system throughout the world. So they were already selling oil, but they were doing it in an illicit way. And when you make something illegal, then that creates a black market. And so it doesn't mean that those goods don't travel. It just means that you put the responsibility of distributing those goods in the hands of the most ruthless and corrupting people. Like the reason that we have cartels in Mexico or the reason that we had gangsters during Prohibition in the United States is because we made these things that are still going to travel um, illegal. And so like in the same way that war is bad, like the criminalization of the delivery of goods across borders also creates like this escalated arms race between the authorities and the people who are and the bootleggers, and the
Yeah,
smugglers.
and the people you met, like, is it working? Do the people yearn for a White Lotus on the islands, or do they?
It's a mix. It's a mix. It's really complicated because there are people who I met that thought, wow, I met people that like Trump,
Oh,
and
tea.
so like taxi cab drivers who were driving the old 50s Chevys. Younger ones were like, oh, I like Trump. One specifically said this, and I was like, why? And he goes, oh, because he said he was going to do something and he did it. Right. So like deposing Maduro, they see the optics of these sort of like a bold leader destabilizing things. And they don't necessarily know about ICE. They don't know that we've got masked cowards running around our cities putting people in concentration camps. They see just the American mainstream media, right? And they go, they want to change. So some people, like in the way that people voted for Trump in maybe 2000, what was it, 2016, looking for, uh, I just want someone to drain the swamp.
Mhm.
I just want an agent of change, someone to destabilize things. That is an impulse where you look at someone like Trump and they go, man, maybe he can liberate us from to change things up because life is stagnant under the embargo. And that's by design to
So
create this sense of, there's a glass ceiling, and I'm trapped by the limitations of my material conditions.
maybe he can liberate us from his own policies. To what extent is the embargo? No, it's an official policy of the United States to deny goods and trade with an island of millions of people.
Yeah, they don't. So the other thing they think is, okay, well, they look at Miami, or they look at American movies and they think, look at all the affluence, look at all the abundance of products. If we were liberated from this government, would we now have all of those things? And I was in the neighborhood of Vedado. So the neighborhood of Vedado would be kind of like, maybe it looks like the equivalent to the West Village in Manhattan, and there's a bunch of old like, I'm not going to call them mansions, but very big houses that the merchant class and the casino class owned right before the revolution. So Vedado, when all of these wealthy people left, they left they thought they were going to be gone for like a month. Back in the 50s. And they went to Miami and they left these houses to their servants who were often black. And they left. So basically, those houses became this really affluent bougie neighborhood was populated in the revolution by lots of black families, right? Black Cuban families. And when you go visit there now, that's like where the Airbnbs are. Like it's a
Mm.
cool looking neighborhood, right? And I think the people in Cuba don't realize that once if the U.S. took over and they made those sellable plots of land, the juiciest prime plots of land would immediately be purchased by like Blackstone,
Right.
and yeah, it might look nicer, but you're not living there, you know, or okay, you're not the ones that are going to get the jobs. Like the Cubans from Miami are going to come back and take those areas and then make them private property and put up no loitering signs. So what is affluence? What is abundance when, something might optically look good, but like you're excluded from it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's interesting that you said, yeah, collective punishment. Like, would you liken the effects of an embargo to the effects of a war? Like, how does it really affect everyday life for people?
So yeah, and they, I went to a clinic when I was there. So first off, I think it's important for everybody here to not be apathetic. And like one reason that I went on this trip was I have my own podcast, Halal Cartels, that I run with Samir Nassim. And I think for a while we started it like right at the end of the sort of pandemic era. And it was pretty apocalyptic, pretty doomer, a lot of black pilled ideas. And since then, a lot of predictions I had have come true, but I also felt like if I'm going to keep hating and complaining, I have to take some steps to sort of showcase or speak about a possible future that is not just entirely negative, you know. And my trip to Cuba was like putting my money where my mouth was, right? Like, hey, look, you can. I'm not telling everybody to go there or support it, but I'm saying find a cause and find a group, and direct action is really the only thing that it will save us and save you and your own soul and your own self-esteem. You have to do esteemable acts to like fight the despair of thinking that it's hopeless and that you have no agency.
I love that. And also, by traveling, you presumably spent less time online. Just anything to get you off of the doom scrolling and into the world
So
is
so
so
many
crucial.
I mean, radicalizing events all over the world. So I went to right before September 11th. I think on September 9th, I flew to Santiago, Chile,
Oh,
and
wow.
I had thrown a dart at a map right after college, and I was like, okay, it landed in Chile, so I flew down there. And on September 11th, I was in an internet cafe. I missed September 11th in New York. Serious FOMO, you know. Sorry, guys. I missed out on the
So it
collective
wasn't
trauma.
you. You have an alibi.
Yeah, yeah. I was out of state, baby.
Yeah.
So I was down in Santiago, and I'm printing out my resume at the internet cafe, and the planes hit, and we see it all on TV, and I knew it on paper because I'd studied the history, but it didn't hit me until the Chileans around me were like, "Oh yeah, Gabe, this is like the second September 11th. This already happened to us." They're like comforting me. They're like, "Oh, they're there.
Oh.
What a catastrophe!" But you did this. This happened to us in 1973, like on September 11th, when Pinochet couped Allende's government, and they bombed the White House in Santiago, Chile, under the orders of like Henry Kissinger.
Oh my
So like,
God.
so the U.S. had already traumatized this country, right? And after in the aftermath of that, over 3,000 Chileans were sent to like their soccer stadium and tortured and killed. So the equivalent to the number of people that died in the Twin Towers, and I don't know if that was a radicalizing event for me, but it impacted me. I spent the rest of the day like where they thought I was supposed to feel bad that the towers fell, and I spent the rest of the day like comforting them.
Mm.
I'm like, my bad. I'm so sorry that we did that to you guys. Uh, but that was seeing the direct effects of U.S. imperialism abroad. So uh, and I see that connected to Chile as well. Or, I'm sorry, to Cuba. I'm like, oh, I don't want like the last thing in the world I would want is Trump to enact his invasion idea on the island. And I want so many of the poorest people that I met in Cuba are better off right now under their current government than they would be under United States occupation.
Because it's that's not just a hypothetical. It has happened, right? Like the US did occupy Cuba, eh?
Yeah, yeah, and they occupied Haiti, under Smedley Butler,
Yeah.
you know, and they enacted dirty wars all over Central America too. I mean, another area where some of my consciousness comes from is my family moved to Washington D.C. in 1980, and so I learned Spanish from a Salvadorian woman, Evangelina, because she was like my primary caregiver. Provider when my parents were at work, right? So like my nanny is like this Salvadorian woman, and her whole community would come over to the house and make pupusas and little Salvadorian cheese. And she had a common law husband that lived in the basement with us who drove taxis named Rigoberto, and they lived in the basement for a while. And she had this a big machete over their bed, super Salvadorian, and it said El Salvador on it. So like I was hearing all these stories about like why 100,000 Salvadorians came in 1980, and it was right after Archbishop Romero was assassinated in El Salvador. and the United States, was funding death squads down there, trying to destabilize all of like the left leaning student movements and peasant movements for land reform and for simple things, like public libraries.
How
So
dare they? Yeah. Yeah, no one looks at racists to be smart and logical, but like the biggest irony of people being like, "Oh, we hate immigrants." Well, like you could have just left them alone where they lived. Like the only reason why they came here is because they ran out of opportunities and were fleeing literal death squads.
yeah, and like, why are there more Puerto Ricans in the United States than there are on the island of Puerto Rico? That in and of itself, it's like, yeah, of course I embrace and love immigrants, and I love my New Rican brethren, and I would never say Puerto Ricans shouldn't be here. I want my people, I love them, but the reason that they're here is because Puerto Rico is a colony, and Puerto Ricans can't afford to live there, right? They're getting kicked off their own land. And same thing, like I went to Hawaii and I see homeless Hawaiians. I'm like, isn't that this is like your land? Why are you what are the conditions of being in a relationship with the United States leads to the native indigenous populations having to either move or live on the streets, you know? So that's That's what I see happening in Cuba if we decided to take it under our wings as a protectorate.
Yeah, I saw today. This today is May 12th, and yeah, Trump just truthed Venezuela as and then of image like the 51st state, and it's like, okay, does that mean that they get two senators at the very least? Or yeah,
Yeah.
no, they haven't thought that through. No, it'll be a colony, a protectorate.
Yeah. But I think Cuba is also, it represents like this nostalgia, this past that we, sometimes look back to when we go, oh, what was it like when everybody knew each other in the neighborhood? I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, they have that. Uh, they also have a world where they're not scrolling on their phones all the time, you know? Um, it felt like being in the 70s or 80s, 90s more for me. Like, what was life like before I could scroll or like text people while I'm out. Like if you told somebody you wanted to meet them at noon at a spot, like you got to be there. That was the case in Cuba. And so it's the past and that nostalgia of like life before we kind of like stepped ourselves into the surveillance state of our phones. And it's also the future, a possible future, because they are at the forefront of using solar, um, not in like a national grid, but individually. Like, okay, how do you take care of yourself? Like, so, I know that Code Pink and the People's Forum was sending solar panels there. They also, because they didn't have like big agriculture for industrial pesticides and industrial fertilizers, they had to look back to more dynamic farming practices.
Oh, that's good advice because I hear all the fertilizers getting stuck in the Strait of Hormuz and there might not even be crops. So, like, yeah, what are practical things that we can learn from them for either it's the war economy or climate apocalypse that forces us to get creative?
Yeah, man, they're the most innovative people. Like I had a Cuban guy, I tell this anecdote sometimes, but he like said, "Oh, that 1950s, Cadillac or you think that it's authentic, Gabe," and like almost bashfully or like ashamed. He was like, "But those wheels aren't, from the actual we had to make those wheels ourselves, or the engine inside is Soviet. It's kind of put together like a Frankenstein car. It's not totally like a mint condition 50s car." And I was like, I want you to realize that your what we have in the US, the consumerism we have, keeps us in an arrested development state of like children who are constantly looking for a new toy.
Mm.
Like, I don't like this car that I leased 3 years ago because it's, red. I want a blue one, and, like, the seats don't go back they don't heat up the way I
Yeah.
want them to, you know? So I want a car with seats that heat up, and I need to make sure that I can talk to it and tell it to change channels. And we just dispose of these goods that are still, like, totally, usable. And and I was like, the your scarcity and also your worldview here on the island turns you all into like men and women, not in a binary way, but you're like using your brains constantly to solve problems. Like,
Oh, that's amazing. If they don't even have iPhones, that means they're mm, decades away from ChatGPT.
hmm no, you make do, and you like you learn how to do things on your own, right? Because no one's coming to save you, and you can't buy your way out of your inconveniences.
So, what do people do to cope with their inconveniences? Is that where community comes in?
Yeah, a mutual aid community. I went with Freddie G, another brilliant comedian, and Freddie
Yes,
called me. Yeah,
with episode 6, I believe.
and he called me up and he was like, "Gabe, I'm so worried. Is there a lot of crime? Is it going to be?" And I was like, "No, man, it's like the safest place in the world. And if there are secret police, they're watching you and making sure you're okay."
Oh.
And And it's so funny that like, we have this idea in the US of like authoritarian countries with, police states and censorship. And I can tell you, I saw a couple of soldiers. I didn't see any cops walking beats, and the soldiers were all like young dudes who just asked to bum a cigarette, and like none of them seemed intimidating. And there's no loitering signs there. No one's getting choked out for selling, Lucy cigarettes, no one's getting shot 17 times, while they're trying to pull out their wallet, because the cops thought they had a gun. Like, the police brutality that exists here and the police state we live under is so much more repressive than whatever is happening there. And like I said, with the kids who could walk around the streets safely at night, it's so much more like self-policing because everybody knows everybody. So you're not gonna rob the person next to you that you have to go back home and live next to forever, you know?
Oh, yeah, or people who know your parents.
Yeah. And I'd walk down the street and, like, there might be a lady, handing out little cups of coffee to, neighbors as they walk by. So you might hear, "Oh, a doctor only makes $20 in Cuba, a month." And we think, "Okay, well, yeah, how could I live off $20 a month?" Because we have to pay for every, transaction we have in this country. But in a system of mutual aid, like, okay, somebody's cooking and, like, you go to their house and eat. You're not buying new clothes because there aren't a lot new clothes to buy, so you're, stitching them back up. And all objects have utilitarian value rather than designer brand status value, right? Like, if I went there and I had a pair of Carhartt pants and a pair of, like, Gucci mesh, like, silk linen-y pants, and I was like, "Which do you want?" You know? People would choose the Carhartts. Like, the status doesn't matter. Like, the practical use is what's important.
Yeah, I wonder how do you even flex in Cuba? I guess if it's not, I guess doctors are still well respected. So if you can't flex your brand name shoes or fancy car intelligence,
The gift of gab.
yeah.
You
Oh,
gotta
cool.
Yeah, like, I think I did a podcast episode called, in Halal Cartels called "Was Sex Better Under Stalin?" And,
And
Luisa Diaz was the guest, and her, take was, yes, like, people in these communist, countries, the women, after the wall fell, often said that their experience of life was so much better under communism because childcare was taken care of. um, women were not depending on men to be the sole providers because the state provided so much. So if you were like there in our system, um, sex work, right? Like somebody with money can always pay for someone who needs money, right? Like our system completely relies on scarcity and people inequality. And if women are put lower in terms of pay and lower and beholden to their husbands, then you create a class of people that is always dependent on men with money. And in communist countries, that inequality was like actively fought against. So men after the fall found that it was better for them, right? Especially if they were part of the oligarchs and like money grabbing class, and women regretted it. The end of communism.
On the same way that like men above 6 feet know they don't even have to try or develop a personality.
That's right. I'm 5'11", man, so I had the gift of gab.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in Cuba, people know how to dance, man, because there's no video games are scarce. People know how to play musical instruments because, you've got time. And everybody talks. I thought only Castro gave 4-hour-long speeches, but Cubans will talk your ear off.
Yeah, they sound like incredible podcast guests that like I wish we need to make sure they have the resources they need, which includes electricity and the internet, because how else can people do podcasts?
Oh man, and I really do hope things open up, and I'd love to hear some. They would give the Rogan Experience a run for his money.
Yeah. Yeah, in the same way that yeah, Rogan likes to sit there with a joint, just replace it with a cigar that they might have, yeah, cultivated and rolled themselves.
Yeah, I do, man. I want all of your listeners to respectfully go to Cuba and give them your dollars if you can, and take aid, and it's a really great way to just not take what we have here for granted, but also question how much of what we have here do you really need.
Interesting. How has the trip changed you since coming back?
Well, it would break my heart so much more for an invasion to happen, because I think travel is a great way to humanize everyone. And it like, I was always against the war in Iraq, and I didn't have any Iraqi friends, but I automatically knew that was the wrong thing to do. And it's easy to think, oh, like 2 million people died in that conflict when they're othered, they're just numbers. And I think so many Americans have this lack of empathy for people around the world and even our own neighbors, right? And so it's affected me, and just expanding my firsthand experiences with so many more members of my human family.
Amazing. And how can we help? Is there any legislator trying to break the blockade? Like, is are there any other movements in the pipeline, or it's go and give them your
I
dollars and medical supplies and solar panels?
yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer for you there. I'd say,
Yeah.
follow Code Pink for one and see what they're up to. And check out the Nuestra Americas Convoy. And both of those are on Instagram. And what was the other group? I also was affiliated with the Progressive International, which is a political organization that is on Instagram as well. So Progressive
Amazing. I'll link
International,
them.
Code Pink, yes, and Nuestra America.
And how can people find you?
Oh man, everybody, please come and find me on Instagram at Gabe GabePac and the number 1, Gabe Pac 1 on Instagram, and the podcast is Halal Cartels.
Incredible. I need to go back and listen to the Soviet sexcapades.
Yeah, we keep it spicy. We keep it
Yeah.
spicy. Yeah, man. I'm all about getting back to a matriarchy. You know, I'm not that important. Let the ladies have the status and make the decisions. Just tell me what you want me to do.
It's incredible. Ally.
Yeah, I'm comfortable in my own skin. I got a full head of hair. I got the gift of gab.
And
I'll be fine.
5'11" is pretty darn close to 6 feet. Yeah. Just
Yeah,
need just need the right shoes. And it's also 6 feet isn't a magic number. We as a society have put too much of a premium on 6 feet.
that's right. No,
Yeah,
no
there's
big
so
deal.
much we need to learn
Fr-
that we can learn from traveling and from Cuba,
yeah,
starting with put pride in the in shit that actually matters.
that's right. That's right. Just go meet people, talk to people from other places, and get out of your comfort zone. And if you feel like like a doomer and gloomy, one of the best things to do when you're depressed is go help somebody else and go do something cringe, take the first step in some direction, and make a little change wherever you're at. Not everybody
Yes.
can do everything, but everybody can do something.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen to that. Hallelujah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening and or watching War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. Please subscribe, rate and review, tell your dads. We'll see you next time.